The head was out. I made eye contact with my husband and was like, okay, like, here we go. And then I got the next contraction and I pushed the shoulders and the body out. And my left hand was kind of holding me up. My right hand was feeling the baby. And so I let go with my left hand and kind of fell back onto my bottom as I pulled our baby up out of the water.
I had my children on the floor. I was on my favorite blanket that my grandmother gave me on the floor like a cat.
And I realized in that moment the potential of what our bodies can really do as women.
Like I could feel his head, I could do my own internal, like, yeah, his head, I could feel it.
I was in tears, I was just in tears and overwhelmed with gratitude.
Hi and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast, the podcast that is bringing embodied birth wisdom from women from all over the world sharing their natural birth stories. Don't forget to subscribe and download so that you can always have access to these empowering and positive natural birth stories. Hi Laura and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you?
I am so good, Anna. I am so happy to be here.
So excited to have you. It's so lovely to have women like yourself who have been listening to the podcast to then want to come on and share your own birth stories. I think nowadays it's almost like, I think 80% podcast listeners that contact me and go like, I've had my natural birth now. I want to come and share, which is so fantastic. And I can't wait to hear about your journey into motherhood through your 3 births. And we're going to dive on into first your 2 hospital ones. One that you shared was the positive experience, the second maybe not the way you wanted it, and the third, of course, is your home birth that was most recent, and that we'll dive on even deeper into. So please take us back to becoming pregnant and choosing the birth and the birth team that you did. Were you aiming to have a natural, unmedicated, physiological birth, or was that something that just happened through research after time? Or when you were pregnant, you know, the first moment you knew you were pregnant, was that like obvious for you how you wanted to birth?
Yes, it was. And at the same time, I had not concretely put it down in my mind until I became pregnant.
Mm.
So my husband and I intentionally were trying to conceive our first. And then the COVID-19 pandemic happened, and we had the discussion, should we keep trying now? Should we pause? And we said, 1, this won't last that long. And 2, we can't let this decide our family plans. Like it was a good thing we had made that choice because I was already pregnant. 2 weeks into everything being locked down, I found out that I was pregnant. There was no surprising my husband. He was the one who was doing the grocery runs at that time, and I was not. And so I said, I think you need to go get a pregnancy test. I'm pretty sure I'm pregnant. And so I found out that I was pregnant and knew that I wanted, at that point, it was very instinctive. I wanted midwifery care. I was a human development and family studies major in college, and I had taken a course, and it was a professor actually who had assigned reading Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. And so I read it as a sophomore in college. At that time thinking I'll just get the epidural. That's what my mom did. Like, that's just like, that's what you do. And I read that book when I was 20 and said, wait a second, I actually don't know. Maybe I don't. And by the time I got pregnant at 29, I was clear that I wanted a natural birth. And so when I got pregnant, I just started Googling where I could find midwives. And at that time I'd had a childhood best friend who had a home birth, but I did not feel like home birth was a good choice for me. It was lack of knowledge, really. But I said, I'm going to go in a hospital, but I want to have a midwife. And so I found a midwife team. It was brand new. They had just started in November of 2019. I was like the first pregnant woman who had seen them once before she got pregnant. It was brand new. And so I called them and that was that. There wasn't really a debate between options for me. That was the choice because there were like 2 midwifery groups in the hospitals, and that was the one that was closer to me. And I had looked on the website and seen the profiles of the midwives and felt comfortable. So I got to meet them, and I did. I thought they were lovely. I had generally a very positive birth or pregnancy experience. Because of the pandemic, I knew that my mom would not be able to be in the birth room with me. The deal was one support person plus a doula if you had one. And so I knew that. I was due in December. I had the whole year of 2020 to prepare for this. And so I said, well, that I was on the fence. And I said, that makes the decision. I'm getting a doula. Thank goodness. In some ways, I'm so grateful that things played out the way they did because we got a really wonderful doula. And she was such a support for my husband, which was my goal, that I knew if I was going to do this unmedicated, he would probably get a little freaked out. I tried to give him some YouTube videos. I tried to prep him. And I also knew that it's not the same if it's not your wife who's the one going through it. And she was wonderful. She taught him how to do fantastic counter pressure. And as somebody who has never felt a contraction in my front, I've only ever felt them in my back. Counter pressure is great. And so she gave him such guidance and such reassurance. Apparently, multiple times throughout that birth, he asked, is everything okay? Is this normal? And yeah, everything's normal, everything's fine. And I was able to tell him after that I had been fine, that I know it sounded like a lot, but at no point was I in distress. So that reassured him for future births. And I also, the midwife laughed with me. Apparently she remembered this when I came back with my second. I had my daughter, and then I said, okay, that wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it would be. I could do that again. Not tomorrow, but I could do that again. And she laughed. She said she'd never had anybody say that. But I was really geared up. Like, if this is going to be hard, I'm going to be ready for it. And then it never got as hard as I thought it would get, which was the right way to err, for sure. My daughter did have meconium. With that first birth, she had meconium in the waters. It broke right as I started pushing. And she came out, and because it was a hospital, they had the whole NICU team in there and all of that, which really didn't derail me at all. I was in such my own world. It didn't matter. But it was fine. She was on my chest. They never took her off my chest. Everything was fine. And I was told that I had a cervical lip in that birth, and they just moved me through different positions. And then I started pushing, and it was really a non-issue. Knowing what I know now, having had 3 babies now, I think I've had a cervical lip probably with all of them. And I just kind of pushed through it. Now I understand, like, it's so not a thing. It's nothing to worry about. But in the moment, I was just really appreciative that they didn't jump to hysterics or anything dramatic. They said, let's try this position. Within, I think, an hour, it was resolved. And she was good.
Yeah, the thing with cervical lips, which is really something I've only really encountered with American mamas' birth stories, and birth trauma healing sessions I have with Americans. It's just not a thing I feel anywhere else. And it's just your cervix will open. That lip is not a stubborn thing that won't move on its own or open. And if your body feels pushy when there is a lip, great. If it doesn't matter. And, eventually, as always, that baby will be born, And yeah, I don't know what the hang up is with that, but it is an American thing, that's for sure.
It's been so interesting to me learning that. Listening to the podcast, really going, wow, who knew?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if no one can also put their fingers into check, it's also that thing about routine examinations, and also kind of before you can push, that there's, especially in hospital, that kind of thing. Oh, we have to check that there's not a lip, or we check that you're full. It's like, if you feel pushy, there's a reason. Your body is wise.
And I did have a list. The doula had encouraged me to make a list going into the hospital of kind of what are my big things that I want or don't want, and no numbers. That was one of my top big things, was no numbers. If you check me, I don't want to know. They only checked me twice, maybe three times that first, when I checked in, I think it was 8 centimeters, and then with the lip, and then I was, and then they call me by my name. A lot of them would say, Mama, Mama. And I was like, that feels like a cop out. You don't actually know who I am.
Yeah.
And so those were a couple of big ones for me. But Don't ask me to number my pain. I don't care. Make it up. I literally wrote that down. I said, look at me, make it up. I'm not going to tell you. I had a lady ask me what the baby's name was. A nurse asked me what the baby's name was, and I just closed my eyes and faked a contraction. I was like, I'm not answering you. I'm not talking to you.
Love that. Focus within, shut out the rest. And even though you did have the NICU team there and everything, you felt that that experience, though, was positive. You felt empowered throughout it. That was a
I
positive hospital
I
experience.
felt very supported. When I checked in, I had the midwife that had been my favorite who happened to be on duty. And like, it is the risk, with a group that you don't know who you're going to get, but she had been my favorite. She was on duty. So we checked in I went into labor at about 6:30 p.m. I had my first contractions. I didn't recognize them as such until about 8 p.m. Around 9:30, I was texting with my doula saying, why am I shaking? And she was explaining it's, that's normal. Journaling, like, take a bath. I got in the bath. I labored in the bath. My husband was like laying on our bathroom floor, like time of the contractions, until about 12:30. And then he said he'd been talking to the doula. And he was like, she said whenever we want to, because like the plan had been stay at home until morning, try to go in the morning. And he was like, at this rate, she says, if we want to go in, she'll meet us whenever you want to go. And I said, yeah, I think I'd like to go. So we went in, we got to the hospital about 1, and then labored there. I was 6 centimeters when I got checked in because they did tell me that one. I had forgotten to tell the triage team. I don't want to know. And then I had my daughter, I started pushing at 7. At 7 is also shift change. So I started pushing, and then the midwives did shift change right there at the foot of my bed. And the person that swapped in was also somebody that I really liked. And so I felt good. She was super encouraging, very patient, very non-dramatic. She, I have since learned, is like the person who brought midwifery into the hospitals here in Indianapolis, and is like a really big natural birth force here. So I couldn't have been in better hands in the hospital. And she was just so encouraging. Again, I said, no numbers. I don't want you to count me down from 10. I don't want any of that when I'm pushing. And so I pushed on my side. I was on my right side. And it took probably like 15 minutes for her to crown, but it was only a 50-minute pushing period. I didn't tear. She said I had like a little first degree thing that wasn't even worth stitching. My daughter was almost 9 pounds. Everything was just super, super smooth.
So that led you to, with your second, want to have another hospital birth. Was that with the same team?
It was with the same midwifery team. The practice had expanded since then, since I had had my first. My son was born 2 years later, but there was just such demand for midwives that they added even more providers. And so, yeah, I'd felt supported. And one thing I think that is important with my daughter's birth is when her head was born, I wanted her body out. And so it was just like push her head, push her body. And I have since learned that is what the hospital likes to do. So it really worked out. But they really don't like a 2-stage delivery. And that was ultimately, jumping ahead, that's ultimately what went sideways with my son. And so with my daughter, I wanted her out all at once. So with my son, I had felt really good about it. The high was incredible. I was like, natural birth is absolutely the way to go. Why would I ever have considered doing this differently? So I got pregnant with my son. He had an anterior placenta. It did freak me out a little bit. I couldn't feel him quite as much. He also had a low-lying placenta, which we discovered at the anatomy scan. They also, just as a quick side note, because I feel like it's important with the ultrasound, they also told me at the 20-week ultrasound, like, he might have a kidney issue or he might just need to pee. So come back and we'll check it in like 4 weeks. And I came back and his kidneys are fine. This boy is just a boy who still holds his pee. He's almost 3. He's like, that's just who he is. He's been like that since in utero, apparently. My low-lying placenta resolved itself. It moved plenty far out of the way.
And I really want people to hear this because so many people have like the most anxiety-filled pregnancy because they're told at the 20-week anatomy scan that they have a low-lying placenta, which 99 point like something high, they move. Like very small percentage, and I'm talking a minuscule percentage don't. Most move. And so I really want everyone to hear this because this is something that can cause so much stress for women. And even that providers, especially in the US, for some bloody reason, say, okay, so if it doesn't move, we have to go for cesarean. You know, at 20 weeks, like, stop it, stop it. Most of those placentas will not be an issue. Most of them, right?
It moved. It was so not an issue. It wasn't even close. It was so not an issue. And then I also managed to fall down the stairs at 28 weeks pregnant with him while holding my toddler daughter. He was fine. She was fine. I was real beat up. They were fine. I had a fender bender when I was 37 weeks pregnant with him. He was fine. Everything was fine. I mean, this boy, he's a chill dude. I feel like he taught me, like, just calm down, mom. Just calm down. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. But I went into labor with him. I will admit with him, I was struggling, that I was not going far over. I had him at 40 and 1. I had my daughter at 40 and 2. I learned my lesson to stop telling people my due date. Took me until round 3. I cried like half the morning with on my daughter's due date because everybody was asking whether she was here. I was like, if she was here, I would have told you. And I felt like such a failure, my daughter's due date. And with my son, I didn't cry through the morning. I said, it's okay. You get a full baked baby. You want a fully baked baby. This is good. This is good. But I was still feeling this certain pressure of, like, he should be here. He should be here. And so I'll admit I did get a membrane sweep with my son. It was completely a non-issue. It was not uncomfortable really in the least, which really should have been my flag. Like, lady, you're about to go into labor. Like, it's so almost here. But I did have a membrane sweep. I just happened to have an appointment on my due date and I asked for one. She was like, we do not need to do this. And I said, no, I want one. And so she did what I asked her to. And then I went into labor the next morning. I was dropping my older daughter off at daycare and started having contractions every 20 minutes. And then they picked up to 10 minutes and they were picking up. So I texted my husband, who is a teacher, and said, okay, get a sub, come home. So he got his sub, he made his way home. Well, as soon as I texted him, everything stopped for about 30 minutes. So by around the time he was getting home, things were picking back up again. Then by around noon, I was like, okay, I'm starting to get that adrenaline shake like I got with my daughter when things were getting real. And I texted my doula, who was a different doula this time. The doula I'd had before was no longer doulaing. And the first doula had been through the hospital system. I've learned now that I just got really lucky. The second doula was also through the hospital system. She was mediocre.
Yeah.
And I texted her and said, hey, I'm getting the adrenaline shakes. Like, I know this is real. And she said, well, you don't want to be in transition in the car. You should probably go to the hospital now. And in my gut, I didn't really feel like I needed to go to the hospital yet. But I also was like, well, it's a second baby and they say they go faster, so I don't know. And I didn't really trust myself. And so we went in around 1 p.m. Now, when I texted my doula and we went into the hospital, like, everything stopped in like 30 minutes. I got to the hospital and labored. Things really picked back up again. So we got to the hospital around 1 p.m. Around 7:30, things started really rarely, kind of sporadically happening. Things were kind of full speed by 10 a.m. We got to the hospital around 1 a.m. And then when we left, my parents were there to watch our daughter. My dad said, do you think we'll have a baby by the morning? And I said, Dad, I think we're going to have a baby by dinner time. And he was surprised, but sure enough, we got to the hospital, things moved right along. My son was born at 5:39. But we got there, everything picked back up. And at that point, I knew I didn't have to move anywhere anymore. I knew, like, there was nobody else to notify. And so I think my body was just like, okay, like, we can do this now. Let's do this. I know it would have been faster if we'd stayed home, but it is what it is. I was able to labor in the tub at the hospital, and I labored in the tub for both of my hospital labors, but I was not supposed to give birth in the tub. And they had protocol where every 40 minutes you had to get out and get monitored, and then you get back in the tub. And so I got out for one of the monitorings, and my husband had been through one natural birth with me before, and he said, oh, as soon as you started going feral, I knew that, like, baby's almost here. So he got really happy. He got very lighthearted. It was really delightful for me, as I was struggling for him to be in a space where he was just happy and excited. Like, it was the, like, emotional cheerleader energy that I needed. He was there for me. But I could tell like he was just happy and excited, and that felt good. That felt really safe. And so I was pushing my left side this time. And I mean, my son's head came out real quick. When he decided he was ready, he was ready. And then I could feel my body being ready for a pause. And the midwife, who had up to that point been great, she would pop in and everything looks so great. You're doing wonderfully. When I was like 9.5 centimeters, she was like, hey, you know, if your body's telling you to push, push. Do what you need to do. When one of the nurses was like, do you want her on her back? She was like, wherever mom is strongest, like mom should push. Like, we don't need to move her. And I was like, okay, this is good. This is exactly why I'm here. This is why I'm with this provider. But I was still in the hospital. And so his head was born, and she said, lift your knee. And I said, no. And she said, lift your knee. And she like motioned to the doula, and the doula listened to her instead of to me and lifted my leg up.
Wow, that
And
is such not okay. Not
and
okay.
so I said, no, it hurts. It hurts. And she pulled my son out of my body.
Oh my God.
And so, and it was quite a screwy mental thing. I was so happy to have my son there. And I was also just felt so much just like a discarded vessel, like the baby's here. Let us worry about the baby. And so if you had asked me right after that birth, I would have said it was a good birth. It was a little bumpy at the end. Like I was in a birth high still. And I loved my son, and he was a great breastfeeder, and he was just like, he was perfect, and everything was great. But I couldn't bring, my husband had taken some live photos as he was being born. And I could watch the photos, like because they would move, and they would string together into kind of video. I could watch the photo, but I couldn't turn the sound on.
Yeah.
And I knew I couldn't, and I didn't turn the sound on and watch them with the sound until my son's first birthday. And then I said, like, you need to watch this, like you need to see this. And so after the kids had gone to bed, we sat on the couch and I watched them kind of over and over, and I just cried and I ranted to my husband for probably like an hour.
Mm.
And he was great, and he just listened and he held me, and I felt very cared for then. And I realized that, like, as much as I love my son and as much as so much of that birth experience was good, I can't go back. I don't feel safe, because that was somebody who I thought checked all the boxes, who I thought did all the right things, and hospital policy was still bigger. And I was not gonna ever be bigger than that.
Yeah, that was not okay. I'm so sorry that happened to you. That was violence.
Yeah.
That I feel that in my whole body. The overreach of power that happened there from both the doula and the midwife, that totally broke your trust and did not hear you. That is obstetric violence right there.
Yeah.
Not okay. I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Thank you. And so I had decided, and I told my husband, I said, because we knew we wanted a third. And I said, the third one will be a home birth. And I remember I was sitting in the living room, he was in the kitchen. I said, the third baby's going to be a home birth. And he said, yeah, okay, that sounds great. And that was that. Like, that was the conversation. And I said, I'm researching midwives. And he said, awesome. Like, that sounds great. And so before I got pregnant, let's see. So it was January. My son's birthday is at the start of February. It was January before I got pregnant. I had started researching midwives, and I called a bunch, and I was researching doulas, and I had called a whole bunch and was talking to them. I had a whole spreadsheet laid out, because if there's anything I'm good at, it's organization. And I was like, I can make a plan. So I started contacting, and I was like, okay, this is the midwife. Like, this is who we're going with. And so then I had my IUD removed, and I had not had a period since before I had gotten pregnant with my son, I got pregnant with him in May of 2022. He was born in February 2023. And then I was breastfeeding him, and I had an IUD. and I was still breastfeeding him. And I had my ID removed to get pregnant with our third, and my period hadn't come. And we had always gotten pregnant quickly. I would have one cycle and then we'd get pregnant. One cycle and then we'd get pregnant. In my head, I don't know why I thought this was now some sort of pattern. Two points in any direction make a line. But I was like, I'm going to have a cycle and then we'll see. We'll see, because I might not get pregnant that fast. But I didn't get a cycle. And I didn't. And I was like 5 weeks along. And I was talking to my friend and I was like, what if my cycle's off? And she's like, what if you're pregnant? So I got a test. I called her on my way home from work. I said, I'm going to get a test. And she said, yeah, get a test. Get a test. It's been 5 weeks. Get a test. One way or the other, like, let's find out. And I went home and I took the test and I called her and I said, I'm pregnant. And so we called the midwife that we knew we wanted and said, hey, we're pregnant. We don't really know when. It wasn't before this date. It was not after this date. And I actually realized, I looked at the calendar, I found out that I was pregnant with my youngest and that I was pregnant with my second on the same day. It was May 21st, both days. The first time I know because it was my brother's wedding and I wanted to know if I could drink or not. Like, that was as simple as that. And I found out I was pregnant with my son. And so I looked at the calendar and went, oh my gosh, it's my brother's anniversary. And here I am, I'm pregnant again. And so I had looked at the tests, and my son's test was a pretty faint line. I was about 3.5 weeks along. I looked at the test, and it was a much stronger line. And so I was like, okay, I'm probably a little bit farther along. So we estimated January 10th as a guess date. But I knew better than to tell anybody. I said sometime in the second half of January. So I go to my first appointment. My A1C was high. And so they had me start sort of a paleo adjusted diet, which kept my blood sugars well under control. So I think I technically checked the box for gestational diabetes. I don't know whether I actually did or not, because all we did was change my diet. And then we checked my blood sugar and we checked my A1C again later and everything was fine. So that was that. Like, there was no gestational diabetes test. It was just, your body's doing well. So we will continue. And so that was the first thing where I was really grateful I wasn't in the hospital. Okay, yeah. We just make sure I'm healthy. And then we don't have to, like, drink weird things and do wildness. So that was awesome. I also really, really lucked out. And a doula and student midwife in our community was offering something called the Body Ready method for free for 10 women as part of her midwifery charitable work. And so I applied and I was offered a spot in that. And so it was online. I would send her some pictures. She would give me some exercises. And I had had nerve pain in my right leg with each of my previous 2 pregnancies. And I did the exercises religiously and I never felt better. It was my 3rd pregnancy in 4 years and I felt great. So I will swear by the Body Ready method as well.
The body what?
Body Ready method.
Body Ready method. I've never heard that before. That's very curious. And can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about the exercises? Was it like stretching or weights or?
So it was, there's a little bit of stretching and then it was just like some body weight exercises, sort of like yoga, Pilates sort of informed, a little bit of like physical therapy informed. The person who developed it, Lindsay, and I'm blanking on her last name, but she was a physical therapist or occupational therapist and then became a doula. And I had done some physical therapy for the nerve pain with my other pregnancies. It just felt like physical therapy wasn't equipped for how quickly your body is changing in pregnancy. And this seemed to get it. And it was very personalized. Like, she was looking, the doula was looking at pictures of me standing and going, okay, here's where things don't look in alignment. Here's where I think we need to strengthen this and that sort of thing. And so it was personalized exercises to me. And I noticed a huge difference. And in fact, I had gotten a few massages and the massage therapist said she even noticed that there was like less tension in my back and shoulders, I think, because I was just carrying myself in a more balanced way.
I mean,
Because the exercises were largely around my hips and legs.
yeah. Oh, wow. That's so cool. Interesting.
So that was wonderful. And another just one of those checks that I was like, okay, yeah, like I'm glad I'm doing this sort of my way, like a little more holistically. Nobody looked at me sideways, my home birth midwives. Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. Let's do that. Nobody was doubting if it's working, it's working. And so then I did decide to have a 20-week ultrasound. And they said, hey, you know what? It looks, based on baby size, we think your due date's more like January 19th. So, okay, great, cool. Let's push that back. That's not a problem. And I just kept telling people, yeah, the end of January. And my husband had made the mistake of telling some people at his school where he works the actual due date. So he got to live the consequences of that as January came through and baby was not coming. I did when I thought I was 39 weeks. My oldest came home from school throwing up. But, oh no, I really don't want us sick to bring a new baby into being sick. I don't want me to be sick trying to give birth. And I had noticed my body was seeming like it was starting to prep itself. And then it stopped. My daughter was out for a full 5 days out of school. And then she went back and I was down for maybe a day. I wasn't sick, but I just felt under the weather. So we got ourselves back to health. And I was into what I thought was my 40th week. And I was, okay, all right, we can start this back up. No worries. I have baby at 41 weeks. No problem. That's fine. Come on, body. We can get back into it. And I was having like some random bouts of contractions where I'd text and say, hey, just heads up, I'm having some. And then an hour or so later, they'd disappear, or a couple hours later, they'd disappear. And so we go to 42 weeks. And I appreciate at no point did my midwives have anything but trust and support and encouragement. Thankfully, my childhood best friend, her babies had both gone to 42 weeks. And so I was able to text her and she could give me support. I remember the first thing she said when I was texting her, and I was anxious about it because my babies had come at 40 weeks the last 2 times. And so this was really throwing me off. And the first thing she said was, congratulations. And I needed it so badly because everybody was like, well, aren't they going to induce you? Why haven't they done this? Why are you still pregnant? And my husband was getting it at school. It's like, what's going on? What's going on? And he was getting that from like 40 weeks. We're like, guys, chill. But now we're getting to 42 weeks and we're going, what's happening? This doesn't seem right. My son's birthday was my 42-week mark. And so he turned 2. And I felt like baby wasn't moving the way I was. It felt weird. And I couldn't tell if it was my nerves or not, but I was like, you know what? I called the midwife. We went in. She did a non-stress test. And heartbeat was kind of high, but it was never dipping, like too low. She was like, I don't love how high it's getting, but also it's not concerningly low. So here are some choices. And I really appreciate it. Here are some choices. You could do this. You could do this. And we decided to go home with a Doppler at home. And it was Sunday. And we'd go in for a biophysical profile on Monday, which is something that the state of Indiana requires if you're going to pass 42 weeks, that you need a healthy biophysical profile on record, and then you can keep going. So Monday, my husband took off work. We sent the kids into daycare and we went in. I had cried my eyes out the night before because I was like, I might be having a C-section. I might be having a hospital induction. Like, I don't know what's happening. What if baby's not okay? And if baby's not okay, I want them to come out. And we waited until birth to find out the sex. I want baby to be okay, but I really want this home birth. I want this home birth so badly. But I don't want it at the expense of my child. And so it was going to be a stat biophysical profile. We just had to wait until they called us. They put in the order, but then it was just, we don't know what time. They'll call you, and when they call you, you go in. And so they called us finally around noon. And so we went in, we had it, and one baby decided that was a good time for taking a nap. So it took us until the last 10 minutes of the scan before baby got all of their movements in. But we walked out of there with an 8 out of 8. Everything looks healthy. Everything looks great. And then with a weird message where the ultrasound tech said, they're so crammed in there, I couldn't tell the sex if I wanted to. But also, you're telling me you normally have 8.5 pound babies, and I would estimate this baby is around 6.5 pounds. So I think you might be at like 38 and 5 based on the measurements here. You might have another week or two to go. And so we told midwives, we called our families. We said, hey, it might be a while, guys. We had no idea when this baby's due date was. And I was thinking at that point, I was like, okay, you know what? I had an old pregnancy test with my son, and I had a new pregnancy test with this baby. And that might explain the difference in the lines that I saw. But either way, baby's healthy, we're good, we're going to wait it out. And so I even went home, I called a wedding planner that I was scheduled to work with, because you book weddings so far out, and my primary work is bridal hairstyling. So I had booked weddings assuming a mid-January due date. And so I called her and I said, look, I don't know that first wedding back that's supposed to be mid-April, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do that. I'm just giving you a heads up. And she was so nice, so understanding. Yes, we will figure it out. Don't even worry about it. Worry about your baby. Everything's fine. I appreciate you telling me, but like, it's fine. I contacted my therapy clients because I'd already been on leave, and was like, hey, if we want to do some check-ins over this next week, sounds like I got some time. And then you're going to have a maternity leave still from me, even though I haven't seen you in like 3 weeks now. And so got a couple of those scheduled, and then, it's like, whatever. I was having some mild contractions. I was hanging out on my birth ball. I'd been doing this for 3 weeks now. It was just par for the course. And I mean, at this point, I'm not telling anybody. I've just been told baby's not ready to come yet. And so we're chilling. I mean, we'd gone out to lunch. We had celebrated. So we had the oxytocin rush, which was for sure. But we were having a good afternoon. We were feeling great again. And then we got the kids. We went to swim lessons. We came home. We put them to bed, and I was feeling tired. And so around 9:30, I told my husband I was going to go to bed. I already had the lights off in the bedroom, but I'm super pregnant. And so I went to the bathroom one last time before I got into bed. And I went, is that something? Is there something in the toilet? Is that something on the toilet paper? I don't know. I'm tired. I'm going to bed. I did not tell him. I did not turn on the lights and check. I just got into bed, went to bed. So it was like 9:30. And then I woke up at 11:48 p.m. to what was definitely a contraction. I just laid there because who knows? And 10 minutes later, I had what was definitely a contraction. And so I got up and I went to the bathroom, and I definitely had bloody show. I was like, okay, it's for real now. And so I just got back into bed, and I grabbed my phone and I texted my husband, because when I'm pregnant, I snore a lot. Also, we have 2 children who have been bed sharing babies. And so it's one of us can get better sleep if the baby comes into one of us. And so he was in the guest room and I was in our primary, and I texted him and I said, it's happening. Like it's baby time. He had just gotten into bed. He had not gone to sleep yet, because he was like, we're not having a baby. I'm going to hang out for a little bit. Well, so he got no sleep that night. So I then called my photographer, because my photographer lived an hour away. And I said, it's baby time, come on up. So she came on, was heading her way. My sister lives 5 minutes from us. And so I texted her, because she was going to be the person on deck should my kids wake up. Because again, I've got kids who typically wake up in the middle of the night and come cuddle in bed with us. And so she was going to be there. She had had her baby 7 weeks prior. I'd been here with her for that. So she and her baby son came over to our house. And then I called the midwife, because I was like, here are my priorities. I need my husband to know. I want photos. I had told people the whole pregnancy, I want photos. If the midwife doesn't make it, fine. I want photos. So I called the photographer. Then I called my sister, because I was like, okay, I need somebody on deck for the kids. Then I called the midwife and I said, hey, it's happening. Like, I know it's happening. And she said, okay, fill the tub. Let me know when you need me. And I said, sounds good. And then I called my parents, who have never been more out of it, I think, in any conversation I've had with them ever, because they were both like, we're not having a baby now. And then that night I call them and say, we're having a baby. My mom says they were practically bumping into each other. They were so foggy headed that they couldn't believe this was like real. They live about an hour and a half from us. And I have my mom's location. So I kept sporadically checking it, being like, they haven't left the house. They haven't left the house. They might miss this birth. Like they took a hot minute. But my sister came. She put her son to sleep in the guest room. He slept the whole rest of the birth. I mean, what a champ of a 7-week-old. And then she and my husband were filling up our birth tub. They got me some mango. They got me some strawberries. I was just laying on the bed in between contractions. And then when I would feel one coming, I would slide off the edge of the bed onto my knees on the ground. And I'd put my arms up on the bed and just kind of rock a little bit through them. I was functioning very well on my own, happy to know that they were nearby, but not really needing anything. My photographer arrived and she just sat down in a chair in the corner and just chilled out. It was lovely. We had the bathroom light on, and that was it. So there was a little bit of light in the bedroom, but it was otherwise pretty dark. I could tell the contractions were closer together when I was on my knees, or kind of like up, like leaning on the bed. But I was also tired. I had slept for just a couple of hours, and so I would rest in between. And I get on my knees, and then I might stay on my knees for one round. And if I stayed on my knees in between, they were maybe 6 minutes apart. If I laid on the bed in between, they were maybe 8 minutes apart. And we did that for a little bit. And then I wanted to start being like up on my hands and knees. So I was on my hands and knees some. My husband started giving me some counter pressure, which at this point, because we had opted against a doula this time, I was like, I don't need any more people in that room. And you and I know what we're doing. Like we've got this. And so he was giving me counter pressure as needed. I went to the bathroom at one point, and I had hated sitting on the toilet for my other 2 labors. I was like, this actually is kind of nice. This isn't bad. And so I thought, okay, well, this will speed things along. So I didn't want to be in the bathroom, but I got out and I came in, I sat on a birth ball, and I just kind of leaned over the edge of my bed. And my sister and my husband took turns giving me counter pressure. And my husband at one point, it was around, I have a couple of notes here because I was going to try to remember this. It was a little bit before 3, maybe 2:30ish. My husband said, like, when do you want me to call Sam, the midwife? I'm like, I don't know. I could tell I was progressing. I could feel like my neck and my head getting heavier. I could feel that I needed to be more inside of myself in between contractions. I had stopped being able to talk through them a while back, but I was less conversational in between them. And then I started feeling like a really instinctual need to ground. And I wanted to get off the birth ball, and I could feel the adrenaline kick in. So after my first 3 contractions, I had the little adrenaline rush that I'd gotten with all the other births. But this time it made me smile. I was like, okay, it's for real now. I know it's for real now. I did not panic that I was going into transition after my 3rd contraction. I knew my body well enough. I was like, I'm too with it. But this time I had the shakes, and I was like, this feels like transition. And so I got off the birth ball and I laid on my bedroom floor on my left side. And my babies have always liked to hang out on the right. And I do feel like on some level my body was sort of instinctively just centering a little bit. But I laid down and I could feel myself shaking. And I told my husband, call the midwife. And I told my sister, I'm getting in the pool. Like, it was interesting because there was no asking. I feel like I knew, like, it was my home, it was my body, it was my birth. I said, I'm getting in the pool. And they said, okay. My mom had gotten there just a few minutes before. They had filled the pool up and it had been too hot. They had cooled it back down. It was good to go. My sister helped me get undressed. I had a sports bra on, and I wanted to leave that on. And then I got in the pool. It felt great. I'd had a couple contractions in the pool, and then my midwives walked in around 3:45-ish. And I was definitely in transition. I would lay on my back and kind of rock my hips a little bit through a contraction. And then after only a couple of those, I need to be on my knees with my arms hanging over the birth pool. And it was interesting I had used combs in my labor with my son and really, really liked that. And I had them, and my husband offered them to me, and I knew like that was not it for this labor. And so I was really just like, I was like trying to keep my hands loose, but I was like wiggling them almost through contractions. And I was really wiggling all of me. I was like draped over the edge of the birth pool, and I'd have my forehead like rocking on the pool noodle that we'd put around the side. At one point, I was so loosey-goosey with it, my mouth went in the water, which did make me laugh like mid-contraction. But I just was moving. I saw the midwives come in. I made eye contact with one. She just kind of like, we acknowledged each other. That was that. They set their things up quietly. It was the midwife and then a midwifery student. And I knew both of them, and they'd been at all the appointments. And so then she quietly asked to listen to baby. I said yes. She listened to baby, said everything sounds great. And that was the extent of our conversation. And then I could feel myself, I could hear myself getting more guttural. I could feel myself like bringing my knees up. It was great because I'd never gotten to have this stage in the water before. And I had never been able to be in a tub this deep. The hospital tubs were just less ideal. And so I could feel myself bringing my knees up instead of like pulling my body down. I was pulling my bottom parts up, and it was great. It felt just like very easy and natural and instinctive. And I just kind of hopped around almost like it wasn't hopping, but I was up and down, up and down. It felt good. And it was intense. It was the point where I was like, okay, I recognize this. And I knew from having had two others, I think it was Ellen Fisher who said like, birth is a natural event, but it is something you can get better at. And I really was feeling that. It was like, okay, like I can do this. And I was saying that in between contractions. I would kind of like, I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. And my husband a couple times would echo back, you can do this. You can do this. And that was the extent of the conversation. And then I could feel the pushing, like the transition out of transition. And so I knew that that transition out of transition has always been the most uncomfortable part of my labors for me. I could feel it happening. I recognized the sensations. I knew I was about to get into pushing. And with the first baby, I was kind of nervous about pushing. I remember asking, like, is it going to hurt? Which was a dumb question. I didn't mean that. What I meant was, is it going to be more intense than what I'm doing right now? And I learned very quickly the answer is no. And so I knew pushing was right around the corner. And I was like, okay, all right, like we are cresting the top of this mountain here. And from where I was, the birth tub was set up in my bedroom. I could see my clock on my bedside table. And it said 4:25. And I thought in my head, 4:44 on February 4th would be a great time to be born. And in my head, I said, well, you can do this for 20 more minutes. And I just remember having that thought. And so I could feel everything like intensifying, and I could hear the grunts getting like longer. And of course, at no point did anybody ever check me. At no point did anybody ever tell me to push. Like everybody just waited. And of course, we had talked about this, but like everybody just waited. And so I could start to feel, I felt pressure like in my butt. I had never felt that before. Like with the other pregnant, they'd be like, you're going to feel this. And I was like, I don't feel that. I felt like I had to poop. I had never felt that before. I was like, okay, I know what this is. Oh, this is great. This is great. And so I started pushing through that a little bit, and I could feel like there's a head happening down here somewhere. They're not out, but like there's a head happening. And so I leaned onto my back during a pause, and I reached down, and Sam did ask, can you feel his hair? And we didn't know the sex of the baby, and I didn't answer her, but I could tell. I was like, and I don't know when my waters broke, but I could feel my membranes. I could feel like ruptured membranes. But I reached my fingers inside just a little bit, and I could feel a head, like less than an inch in there. And I just started hysterically laughing and also sobbing, which freaked my husband out. I learned later. Everybody was quiet. Nobody said anything. But my husband, I guess, because I was here, he was over here, midwife was over here, she had a better view of my face. And so he's like, Sam was smiling. So I knew you weren't like sobbing in distress or something, but he couldn't quite hear me laughing right away. But I was just, it was just an overwhelm of emotions because I was in my bedroom, in the birth pool, like with the people I had planned it for. And I was like, the baby's right here. Like, this is happening. I think in the back of my head, I'd been so prepared less than 24 hours ago that like I might have to do this in a hospital again. I might, da, 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 that it was hard to fully lean into like this is definitely happening. But like I was like, I can feel my baby's head. Like I know it's working. Like this is the way it's supposed to be. And I was just so happy because for like that was it's real. Like it's really happening. And so I was just like overjoyed. And so I spent the whole time between contractions just like sobbing and in hysterics. And my birth photographer got a good picture of it. But it was great. It was great. And then I turned around and kind of got up into more of a squat. And I had my left knee more down, my right knee more up, and I could feel the head like right there. I pushed the head down, could feel it was close. And then another contraction and like started to crown. I had a little bit of ring of fire, which I've not had ring of fire with the other babies either. I'm like, was I that out of my body in the hospital that I wasn't like noticing these things? I don't know. I had never really had the sensation of it. And so I had the ring of fire for like a contraction, but then the head just stayed there. The next contraction, I kind of like intentionally eased the head out a little bit, and then I could feel my body take over and just kind of popped out. And I could feel the head and I could feel the cord kind of floating behind the head. And that was something I had to kind of mentally rehearsed because I had written out a visualization of this birth the January before I got pregnant. I was like, this is what's gonna happen. And I was like, you're gonna feel for the cord around the neck because you want to know where the cord's at before you pull the baby out of the water. And so I had my hand on the baby's head. And that was another thing. I had told myself I wanted to reach down and feel the baby's head. And with my son, nobody had prompted me and I hadn't done it. And I regretted that because somebody had prompted me and I had done it with my daughter. And this time I was like, I didn't even need prompting. It was instinctive. If there wasn't everything else happening, it was instinctual. And so I reached down, I felt the head, I felt the cord, and I was like, okay, the cord is not around the neck. Cord is floating behind the body. We're good. I got my pause. I got my pause. The head was out. I made eye contact with my husband and was like, okay, like here we go. And then I got the next contraction and I pushed the shoulders and the body out. And my left hand was kind of holding me up. My right hand was feeling the baby. And so I let go with my left hand and kind of fell back onto my bottom as I pulled our baby up out of the water. What I hadn't realized was the cord was behind the neck, but she was ultimately kind of wearing it like a backpack a little bit. So I pulled her up out of the water and it was like tight around the back of her head and then like came down over her shoulders. And so I had told the midwife, I said, like, I want to do all of it. I will tell you. If I want your help, I will ask you. And so we had that conversation. And so she did nothing. And I said, help me unwrap. I'm like, help me unwrap them. And so then she had me lift myself up just a little bit. She helped me unwrap the baby. She got, like didn't even leave my chest, just unwrap baby. That was that. And so we just cuddled her. I said I did it. I definitely was in a little bit of hysterics there. It was so interesting though. I had a moment of hysterics as I pulled her up. And then I realized that the cord was around her. And I can watch the video back and I just like stop. And then I'm calm and I'm composed and I say, help me unwrap her. And she unwraps her and then I'm back into hysterics. It was like, my body knew, like, no, you got to focus here for a second. And we took a minute. I heard myself, I didn't even realize I said it, say, we just saw you and now you're here. Because we had just seen her on the ultrasound, like, 18 hours before. And so she was born at 4:43 a.m. So I didn't even have to do it a whole 20 more minutes. And then we pulled her up, checked, and yes, it's a girl, which we were thrilled about. And then it was just like kind of settling in for a bit. I could feel that my placenta was like at the opening of my vagina, but it wasn't just like naturally coming out. And that was another thing, like in the hospital, I felt like I hadn't even practically realized and the placenta was out of me. And I was like, no, I don't want that. I want to be fully in charge of what's happening here. And so I turned to the midwife and I said, I'd like to have my placenta out. Can you give me the birth stool? And she said, absolutely. And so we got the birth stool in the water and she helped me sit up on it. She encouraged me to try to latch. And my daughter, for a girl who I now know loves to breastfeed so much, she was not interested in it 15 minutes after birth, 10 minutes after birth. So we tried and we tried, and I just said, you know what, I'd like to have you, if you could give the placenta, if you could give the cord a little traction, and I'm going to push. And so she did, and I pushed, and it came mostly out. She said, just give me a cough. There's a few membranes in there. I coughed, it came out. That was that. We put it in a bowl. And then they helped me out of the tub, helped me into bed. Then we got our daughter to latch. And then she nursed for like the next 2 hours straight. Like it took forever to do the newborn exam because then she was hungry. And then they did the newborn exam and she was exactly the same size as my son had been when he was born. She was 8 pounds, 6 ounces. Literally the day before the ultrasound had said she was 6.5 pounds. It's my reminder to every mom ever to like, don't trust it. If they say it's a big baby, don't trust it. If they say it's a small baby, don't trust it. Like I was measuring, and I should have known this. I'd always measured very on track with my other two. I was measuring 2 weeks behind with this one. The midwives hadn't even mentioned it to me because they were like, you're always growing. Baby's at a steady rate for baby, so there's nothing to worry about. They didn't even bring it up to me until I asked at like 40 weeks what I was measuring. The midwives never at any point said, oh, like you're going late, it might be a big baby. Like none of that. It literally didn't dawn on me until about 3 weeks ago that is one of the other things I would have gotten in the hospital. In addition to, of course, the encouragement to induce and all of that, but like no one fear-mongered me.
Yeah.
And the midwife said, she said, this is a 40-week baby. We just didn't know the due date.
Yeah.
And so we got everything. I mean, we got everything. And I wrote Sam the nicest thank you note card because I felt so incredibly respected. Like everything that I asked for, I got, and I did not at any point have to fight for it. And that was it. I was like, I think I could probably fight for it in the hospital, but I don't want to fight while I'm giving birth.
Yeah.
And I never had to fight for it. You know, I had my baby. They drew me an herb bath afterwards. Baby and I got in the herb bath. You know, 2.5 hours after she was born, we got to welcome her siblings in, who did not wake up once through the whole thing. Our kids who come into bed when nothing happens in the middle of the night, slept all the way through that, which did mean my 4-year-old pretended to surprise give birth for about the next 6 months after that.
Oh, bless.
She was processing. But it was great. We introduced them to their baby sibling, and then my parents took them, and we laid down and all slept together. And unlike the hospital, where they don't eat a bed share, and we're very much a bed sharing family,
Yeah.
the midwife said, because we had a bassinet that we could put her in as needed. She was like, oh, but she's not going to sleep in that, right? I said, no. She's going to sleep with me.
Yeah.
But it was great. It was beautiful.
That's, true midwifery care, woman-centered, walking with women. Beautiful. I'm so pleased for you that you had that experience. And it's just miles apart from leaving your home and going to someone else's domain and into institutions. It's hard to explain, isn't it? Like that deep cellular imprint that happens at home birth.
Yeah, I just never had to think about it. Things just got to unfold.
Yeah.
And that lack of decision making
Yeah.
was in itself such a decision, like my body was doing the deciding without me having to think about it.
That's it. When a woman is not disturbed, everything just unfolds in the most perfect orchestration for both mom and baby. The way she ends up, birthing, and just the little things, the less someone suggests or does anything, you really can fully be in, because you're so impressionable. So any kind of suggestion, like you said, so many things from the hospital you don't remember. Did I feel that? I don't think I felt that. Or, it's just like when you don't have anyone telling you or, suggest anything, you really do tap into your own instinct so deeply and knowing.
Yeah, there were so many things that I found in the hospital setting that were not big deals, but that looking back, I'm like, I didn't really like the way they said that. And like, was it inherently problematic? No, it was just in that moment, everything comes through stronger and you can't know with how it's going to get taken. There were so many things where I was like, I do want this, I don't want that. And ultimately, that I was like telling my husband, ultimately, it was not an issue at home. None of them became an issue at home.
No. Oh, delicious. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it was great.
So
I do think my parents were very skeptical of the home birth.
Mm.
My mom does not argue with me about things, which I respect. Like, she's like, you're an adult, you make your decisions, but she will stop talking as soon as I say something that she's like, that's a bad idea. And I had told her I was going to have a home birth, and the conversation ended. So I knew. But I think she saw how important it was for me, and what a wonderful thing it was for me. And I don't know, really ultimately how she feels about it now, because she tends to avoid that conversation. But my dad talks about it more. He was just down in the kitchen, but he talks about it. And he saw the video. He watched the video after, but like talks about really how great it was. And I like that can be a change in my family story as well. I like that my daughters, the older one, more aware now, like she sees that as normal.
Yeah.
It's like, well, the baby's going to come out of her vagina. Why is she going to the hospital? Like, hospitals are for C-sections. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And I love that that's normalized. I feel like that is something that my mom gets too. Her last birth didn't go super smoothly, and I'm glad that she got a rewrite in some ways.
I love that for your family too. How beautiful. And I love when older children, see home birth as just this most natural thing, and that, mothers like just birth babies, simple kind of attitude. I love that. So if you had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby, and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdoms would you give to her?
The biggest thing, I think, is educate yourself. Not everybody is going to want the same things. I have friends whose dream births would be my nightmare, and where my dream birth would be their nightmare. But you can only make informed decisions from the information that you know. And so the more you know about it, the better you can decide if something is or isn't for you. And as much as I wish you could count on a provider to do that for you, you can't. And there's just so much out there, and you know what you gravitate towards, but nobody else can know that for you. I feel like the Natural Birth Podcast is what I recommend for birth stories. Badass Mother Birther on Instagram is an account I recommend to people, where it's like, just look, just see, learn about options. But Anime's Guide to Childbirth, and there's so much out there now. Like, the joy of the internet is there's so much out there. At the same time, like, watch the things that you want to have happen.
Yeah.
Don't watch the things you don't. I watched a lot of home births on YouTube, but I was intentional. Like, I wasn't going to watch hospital births once I decided I was not birthing in a hospital. And I was not going to watch anything that was like labeled traumatic. I was like, I don't want that in my head. I have become a huge birth nerd. I love that. And like, I want to learn about those things now when I'm not giving birth, when that's not part of my imminent reality. But the more you know, the better you can decide what you want, and the better you can know what somebody's answers or what somebody's recommendations for you mean, and whether you agree with those or not.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your stories with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a dream.
Pleasure. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as The Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.